Hi, and welcome to Washington Square News. This is Op-Ed Live. Today we're discussing the push for NYU to divest from fossil fuels. With us we have Eil Nachmany, an NYU Student Senator Elect and a member of the NYU College Republicans, and Luke Lindenbusch, an organizer for NYU Divest. In an email sent at the end of March, the Senate Financial Affairs Committee Divestment Working Group announced that it does not recommend divestment from fossil fuel-related companies, but there is an official vote coming up at the next University Senate meeting on April 30th. So, do you think that NYU has a responsibility to divest from fossil fuels?
Absolutely, and I would first like to preface this by talking about that email that was sent in March after the working group committee offered their recommendation to not divest. And first and foremost, it was extremely misleading. Many members of the university community, including people who are allied with the NYU Divest campaign, thought that divestment was completely off the table. And this is a deliberate move by the NYU administration to attempt to derail the momentum that we've seen across the nation, across our university, and across the globe for divestment. In addition, one of the most jarring things about the email was that it stated that divestment and global climate change was not enough of a humanitarian imperative to provide a need to divest. And we would have to disagree with this by saying that this is an urgent humanitarian risk. The risk of global climate change does offer enough of an incentive for the university to need to divest, as they have done in the past with issues such as South African apartheid or genocide in Rwanda. And we're not saying that those issues are the same, but we're just saying that whenever there's a humanitarian crisis that is happening on a global scale, the university as an institution of higher learning has a moral imperative to divest.
Luke, I think you lose your credibility when you say that divesting and climate change is something that's comparable to genocide and apartheid. I think it is, in fact, to take it a step further, insulting to the victims of genocide and apartheid to compare the two. Now, you talk about climate change, it's something that may have the potential in the future to do something like this. Genocide and apartheid are things that have happened. Now, past that, the question was, does NYU have a responsibility to divest from fossil fuels? NYU has a responsibility, but that responsibility is a legal financial duty, otherwise known as a fiduciary duty, to its students, and that's to act in the best interests of the students financially. Now, when you look at the finances behind divesting, that would require NYU firing 39 different managers of different funds, up to $1.3 billion of money that they have tied up in commingled funds, to divest from $139 million that's invested in companies on the Carbon Underground 200, which is only 4% of our total endowment, 3.3% oil and gas, and 0.7% coal.
So I first take issue with the fact that you're saying that I equate climate change with genocide and apartheid, because I specifically said that those are not the same things. What I said is that they are all humanitarian crises that operate on a global scale and warrant the university divesting as an institution of higher learning that has a moral imperative to divest from humanitarian situations that warrant a global response. So I didn't equate those, but I'm simply saying that this is an urgent situation, and the university does have many reasons to divest. In other terms, if we look at the risk that climate change poses, yes, climate change is not necessarily happening in the same way that a genocide or apartheid happens when it's one isolated incident or one issue that happens over a certain amount of time that's very quantifiable. But science is on the side that global climate change poses a severe risk to human life, and that alone is reason enough for NYU to divest. That said, going into your issue on the fiduciary duty of the university to provide for its students, you bring up a fallacious point about NYU having to fire its 39 managers, and this simply isn't true. Other institutions, from municipalities to universities across the globe, have been able to divest, working with their financial managers to be able to make sure that they both ensure the financial stability of their institution while making sure that they have a humanitarian and ethical stance on their finances.
So that's one of the main issues. So, and that was in the email that they sent. It kind of, some would say that it swayed the argument. So, the follow-up question would be, if these commingled funds weren't an issue, do you think that you would support divestment?
Well, you can't simply ask the basic straw man argument of if the commingled funds didn't exist, because that still doesn't attack at the base of this economic argument. You look at whether or not they're commingled funds. These different 39 managers and these different 39 funds that you propose NYU could work with, On a very base scale, that sounds about right. But the problem is that this money is also tied up from different investors. NYU is not the only one who's investing in these different commingled accounts, which represent 38% of our total $3.4 billion endowment. Now, if NYU wants to foster different programs, keep its tuition low, and you recently had the tuition petition to lower the tuition, which had 5,020 supporters, if NYU wants to continue to support things like that, it has to be fiscally responsible, and that's something we're not seeing here.
So first and foremost, we can look at the issue of commingled funds in terms of which of NYU's holdings in the fossil fuel industry are directly held, which is about 700,000. The first recommendation would be to divest those. Beyond that, the commingled funds that we're talking about, it's fallacious to assume, as I said, that we would not be able to divest these simply on the basis that it is 38% of the endowment. And if we look at the past precedent of universities that have been able to divest in the past, they have also had commingled funds and they have made it work. In addition, when you look at the idea of financial responsibility and whether or not this will hinder the institution or hinder the well-being of the students and their financial well-being, a recent report by The Guardian stated that divestment is not only a financially responsible thing to do, but also something that can advance the financial vitality of the university as a whole. One of the slogans that we use is invest in our future, not in our demise, because climate change at its basis and fossil fuels, as they are tripped up in the entire process of climate change, is a risky investment. We are dealing with a finite amount of resources on our planet, and it's not a good industry to be involved in the long run. So this is something that's actually a risky investment that is not going to have feasible return for the university 10, 20, 50 years from now. In addition, the working group for divestment in the University Senate did not provide any evidence as to whether or not commingled funds would provide a substantial risk. They simply issued a concern. So this is an issue that needs to be investigated further, yes, but the fact that the University Senate working group offered no recommendation for divestment without actually looking into the real quantifiable financial ramifications of such a thing indicate that this is mostly talk and not something that actually would be an act of financial irresponsibility.
Now, the problem with that is that the trade-off here is that you have to find a way to responsibly reinvest that 38%. Whether or not you have these different commingled funds, that's still, we're talking about $1.3 billion that whether or not you can talk to a manager, someone who's also managing different other private funds, and asking the university to make a political statement with that money when we have different financial crises here on campus, like I referenced before, the issue of tuition and lowering that tuition, then you can't start to have it both ways where you want to divest, but you also want these different initiatives on campus that we so enjoy and we so love. And if we really want the tuition lowered, if we really want better fiscal responsibility from our university, we can't also ask for something along these lines. There is a trade-off here.
My biggest problem with this argument is that you're not providing a concrete causal link between the financial responsibility of the institution and the rising tuition that NYU charges. Really, what we're seeing here is I have arguments as to why this is financially responsible, and you have arguments as to why this is financially irresponsible. I'm showing how there's no causal link between the commingled funds and further risk for the university, and you're still saying that this is going to cause higher tuition. Something's missing here, and really what we can see is that divestment is something that's financially responsible and something that really we can't consider tuition when we're talking about this. We're talking about the endowment, we're talking about our investment, we're talking about things that are long-term, but if you don't have the causal link, if you don't have any sort of quantifiable evidence as to whether or not the commingled funds would actually simply cease to exist as a part of NYU's financial framework, then we can't continue these lines of rhetoric.
Well, we're not talking about simply it ceasing to exist. But the problem is when there's no alternative fund that's been proposed, and we're talking about $1.3 billion, 38% of our total endowment, then you have to look at how that affects the university's total endowment of $3.4 billion.
Yeah, okay, well, it's definitely a very significant issue, and it's good that we're having this conversation. I'd like to thank you both for joining us, and thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more content like this, you can check us out at nyunews.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at NYU News. We also have a print edition, Monday through Thursday. Basically, any NYU building will have it on their front in the newsstands. And don't forget to have an A1 day.